This is lesson 5, chapter 6, algebra, and its properties. Now there are 4 properties in algebra. We're going to learn about 3 of them tonight and another one of them a different night. So the 3 we're going to learn about are still more vocabulary words for you. First off, we have the commutative property. The commutative property is the order in which 2 numbers are added or multiplied, and it does not change the sum or the product. So for example, if I have 7 plus 9, that's the same as saying 9 plus 7. And I can throw variables in there, like they did here. For multiplication, remember product means multiplication, sum means addition. I have 4 times 6 or 6 times 4. Either way, it's going to be 24, and I can fill it in with variables again. So when asked what the commutative property is, it's when you plug those variables in. Associative property is the way in which 3 numbers are grouped when they are added or multiplied. It does not change their sum or product. So if I group 9 and 4, or 3 and 9, I'm going to get the same answer when I add them all together. Again, I can plug in variables for these problems. We will go through examples of these to make them a little bit more clear. Also, I can look at it for multiplication. I can group 2 numbers and I'd still end up with the same answer. And again, I'm plugging in those variables. So this is my associative property. And last but not least is the identity property. Identity is the sum of an addend, and 0 is the addend. The product of the factor and 1 is a factor. Now what that means is anything plus 0 is that number, and anything times 1 is that number, which we all should know by now. So if I take 13 plus 0, it's going to be 13 whenever I add. And whenever I take something times 1, in this case 7, it's always going to be that number. And again, I can plug in variables and it'll still be the same. You can follow along with me on page 474. That's where all those properties were. And now we're going to look at an example. So it tells me to determine whether the 2 expressions are equivalent. If they are, what property is that? And if they're not, explain why. Well, if I have 15 plus 5 plus 8, what do I get? Well, remember with PEMDAS, order of operations, I need to do parentheses first. 5 plus 8 is 13, and then I take 15 plus 13, and that gives me 28. Now let's try the other one. It wants me to take 15 plus 5 first, and then add 8. Well, 15 plus 5 is 20, and then I'm going to add 8, which gives me 28. So these are equivalent because I get the same answer. And what property is that? That I can add parentheses and still have the same. Well, if you look at your property chart, this is actually the associative property. Your code word for this lesson is Marquette. So doing these problems to find out, you can follow along with me on page 475. We are going to do letters A and B. They want us to say if these are equivalent problems, and then tell them what property we used if it is equivalent. So let's do the first one. If I look at the first one, I have 5 times 6 times 3. Remember, I do parentheses first. 6 times 3 is 18, and then I take 5 times that. 18 times 5 is 90. Now let's do the other one. I have 5 times 6 in parentheses times 3. Well, 5 times 6 is 30 times 3, and 30 times 3 is 90. So these are equivalent, so my answer is yes, they're equivalent. And what property tells me that I can use parentheses? Well, if you look at your chart, this is actually the associative property again. Let's look at letter B. It says 27 divided by 3 and 3 divided by 27. Well, 27 divided by 3 is 9. We all know that. Now, 3 divided by 27 is actually 1/9 or a decimal. So 9 and 1/9 are not the same, so this answer would just be no. And it doesn't use a property because it's no.